Alright, in this video, we are going to go through and we're going to mix our tracks and we're going to assign them to outputs. That way they will show up on our soundboard. Um, and it's important to mix the tracks for each song so that they all sound consistent. A lot of times we have 4 songs from 4 different artists, I guess 3 different artists really. But the point is, they're all different volumes. Some of them are louder than others, and that can be very inconsistent for whoever's running sound at front of house. And so it's much, much better to pre-mix your tracks in Ableton and then send them out to your sound man. So what I do is I actually use buses. Ableton calls them return tracks. So if I accidentally call them one or the other, now you know buses are return tracks. And so what these are is think about what in real life. Think about what a bus does. Is it takes people from one place to another. It takes multiple people from one place to another. It groups them up and takes them elsewhere. The same concept applies for audio buses. So what we're going to do is you can right click down here in this portion of your screen, insert return track. That is also option command T. I'm going to use that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create 5 return tracks. And now the way that you group and arrange and mix your tracks, that is definitely up to you. Kind of with everything else, there's not a wrong or a right way to do it necessarily. There are some guidelines to follow. What is most important, though, is make sure and communicate with whoever's running sound for you. Kind of hear them out, see what they need. If they want dedicated background vocals, you're going to have to take that into consideration whenever you are sorting out your tracks like this. But, okay, so I am going to use only 5. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a mono channel for our click and guide. So I'm going to put an M for mono. I don't normally do that, but I'm going to put an M for our example. I'm going to label this bus, this return track, is a mono click and guide. For our second one, I want a mono synth bass. So that way the only audio that passes through this return track is synth bass. This is going to be a stereo channel, and I'm going to make this keys 1. And more specifically for this weekend, what I have communicated with our sound man is he wants like pads, more darker sounding tracks to show up on this first stereo bus. This other return track is also going to be stereo. This is going to be keys 2, and I think in terms of guitar playing, these are kind of going to be the rhythm tracks. These are going to be the background, stuff that adds motion, textures. And then for this third one, this is also going to be stereo, keys 3. These are going to be all of our lead sounds, the really prominent, the bright, important parts of our music. And so the way that this plays out with the interface we're using and the channels I have at front of house, I have communicated all of that with Alan, who's running sound for us, and this is the breakout we decided to use. Like I said, there's not a wrong or a right way necessarily to do it. Just communicate, and it's going to be great. All right, so one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and you can select one return track and hit Command A. I'm going to turn these all off for right now. Okay, so notice the order here at the bottom. Ableton does not number your return tracks, but it puts a letter next to them. So A, B, C, D, and E. So let's go ahead and let's route. Let's send our first example track to one of our return tracks, to one of our buses. So I'm going to start with our guide track up here. I'm going to drop it down. And you'll also notice that sometimes, and for some reason, Ableton, if you drop a track down and it looks like that, you can just click and drag and you can expand it as big or as little as you want. But once you expand it to a certain size, you will see these send levels. And so these are separate volume sends that correspond to our buses. And so how it works is the lettering, it goes in this order. This one is A, B, C, D, E, so on and so forth. And so what I'm doing is I'm just clicking and I'm dragging my cursor up or down, and that is changing the send level to the bus. And so I want to send 100% of this guide track to return track A, because that is going to be our click and guide. So what I'm going to do is go to guide, click and drag all the way up to 100%, and then we are good to go for that. And collapse that. So now we're just going to go through song by song and do this. I'm going to open up Glorious Day. You can select one track, Command A, and then it drops them all down. Very helpful. Okay, so you'll see here with foundations, we don't see our sends. And for some reason, Ableton just did not expand this track all the way. You just click, you drag, you're good. So I want foundations, our click, to go to return track A. I'm done with that one. I'm going to close it up. We're not going to use drums, the multi-track. I'm going to turn that track off and collapse it. We're not going to use loop or synth loop, so I'm going to collapse and turn both of those off. We don't use bass either. We don't use acoustic. I don't want to use the dulcimer. We're not using electric. We have a very full band this Sunday. We don't have piano. This was a bad example song. Alright, but now we have two keys tracks, so we need to decide where they go. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to loop a section of these keys performances. That way I can listen to them over and over and over. So I want to loop this section right here. So I'm going to click and drag, make my highlight selection, and you can actually hit Command L to loop this section. However, there's one very important thing. If you do this, you have to make sure that you hit Command L again, or you disengage this loop box up here, or else whenever the service rolls around and you're playing all the way up to this point, you will definitely get stuck in this loop in the middle of a service, and that would be a very bad thing. But let's just go ahead and listen. I'm going to solo keys 1, see what it sounds like. Okay, it's very dark sounding there. I'm gonna listen over here. Okay, it's much darker. I'm gonna listen to keys 2. Okay, very bright. I'm gonna call that the lead one for sure. I like to sometimes type in notes next to each track. Oops, I did not mean to type that. I meant to type dark. Brain fart. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send keys 2 to our lead bus, our lead return track. So that happens to be return track E. So remember, we're going to go A, B, C, D, E, 100%. And I want keys 1 to be return track D, A, B, C, D, 100%. So now what I'm going to do is, since I have this portion right here looped, maybe I'll even go to this one. Because based off of these waveforms, this looks like it's the loudest part of the song that these multi-tracks play. And so what we're going to do is we're going to mix the loudest portion of the multi-tracks. And we're going to pick a random decibel number, and we're going to make that consistent across all of our songs. And so for me, I found -12 to be a very helpful number to aim for. So like when these tracks are playing, we're going to see a volume meter, and it's going to tell us how loud that track is. It could be -40 dB, it could be very quiet, or it could be -1 dB, and it could be very loud. I'm going to pick -12. That's a number I found to be fairly common across multiple tracks. The same principle applies. It doesn't matter what your number is. What does matter is that it's consistent from song to song to song. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to loop this, and I'm going to scroll into our other page in Ableton, and because you can actually see these are my 5 return tracks, and you can see here in the bottom portion there is these volume meters. So this is how I'm going to read where it says negative infinity. Once audio passes through there, it's going to give me a number. It's going to tell me how loud my tracks are. So I'm going to be watching those as I play keys 1. Okay, so you see it's negative 15 dB. And so that's not bad. That's very close to my number, which is going to be negative 12. There are a couple different, there's really 2 ways that we can make this louder for us. You have your track volume over here. So you can turn this up. The only downside to this is it only gives you plus 6 dB of gain. You can only turn something up 6 dB, and so, oops, if for some reason that might not be enough for you, what you can do is you can select your clip. I'm going to double click. You can come down here and you can turn your clip volume up or down. So I'm actually going to use clip volume. It's at negative 15 dB right now. Let's go negative 11. Let's see what difference that makes. Oops. So I'm going to start playback again inside of our loop section. Okay, so we're hitting negative 11.1, and that is very close, and that 0.9 dB is not going to make a huge difference, but just to fine tune it, I can actually just now go to our track volume, and I'm going to turn it down. I'm going to turn it down negative 0.5 dB. If that's going to make a huge difference or not, I highly doubt it, but that's how you can kind of fine tune your volume. I'm going to do the same thing for our keys 2. I'm going to solo it and listen. Whoops. Sorry about that. So I'm watching this meter. It's at negative 15. We can get a little bit louder with that. I'm going to turn our track volume up. And so one thing is that this meter here, it's going to give you your peak value, which means there's no audio playing right now, but it says negative 10.1. And what that means is that is remembering like the loudest point. It's going to tell you, hey, it got no louder than negative 10.1 dB. So what you can do is you can click, and it will reset that meter. When you start playback again, it'll reset. Okay, so we're hitting negative 13 dB. Like I said, we're being very nitpicky. So I'm just going to go plus 2.5 and save it. And then, like I said, it's very, very important. Remember to turn off your loop section. If you do that, I'm going to hit Command Save. And now I'm just going to go through and I'm going to mix the rest of my songs like that.